Hello, everyone, and welcome to our discussion. This is a JLabs and New Lab event, Diversity in Clinical Trials focused on access and trust. My name is Alexandra Bacchus. I'm the partner manager here at New Lab, and I am on the team here to introduce the event. Many of you might be familiar with our work at New Lab, but others might be encountering our work for the first time today. Thank you for joining us. For those of you not familiar with New Lab, we're a community of experts and innovators applying transformative technology to solve the world's biggest challenges. Through our membership and studios, we bring together entrepreneurs, engineers, inventors, and industry leaders to create sustainable solutions and enterprises. We employ technologies including robotics, AI, and material science to transform what matters most: health, environment, media, cities, and infrastructure. Today, New Lab and Johnson & Johnson Innovation, or JLabs, are kicking off a new limited event series focused on diversity, equity, and inclusion in healthcare and clinical trials. Part one is about access and trust, where our panel of speakers will investigate how recurring challenges in patient access to clinical trials affect study design, recruitment and retention, and diversity in data sets. We're glad you're able to be here with us. So a few housekeeping notes before I hand it over to Stephen Pitt. Throughout this hour, we're going to conduct interactive polls, so please keep an eye out for these questions. And our panelists are looking to field questions from the audience. To ask a question, please type it out in the Q&A button, and I'll help to get those in front of our panelists. So without further ado, I am glad to introduce Stephen Pitt, the head of JLabs in the U.S. Northeast.
Thanks so much, Alexandra. Really great to be here, and really great to have this partnership with New Lab. We really had a great partnership over the years. So hello, everyone. Thank you for joining us today. My name is Stephen Pitt from Johnson & Johnson Innovation. I'm the regional head of the JLabs at US Northeast, which includes 5 sites across New York City, Boston, and also Philadelphia. So at Johnson & Johnson Innovation, our aim is really to advance innovative products and solutions to improve human health by partnering with and enabling innovators to advance their technology through access to a range of incubation and commercialization resources, including our no strings attached JLabs incubation facilities. We at Johnson & Johnson Innovation are really thrilled to be collaborating with New Lab on this event focused on DEI, which is a topic that's extremely important to me personally, but also to all of us at Johnson & Johnson. As the largest and most broadly based healthcare company in the world, Johnson & Johnson has always applied a scientific approach to address and overcome human health challenges, leveraging our deep scientific expertise, strategic capabilities, and global scale to deliver innovative solutions to people with unmet needs. We focus on the best health outcomes for patients, consumers, and their families. Our focus remains the same as we commit to fighting racism and dedicating our efforts to limiting health inequities that impact people and communities of color here in the United States and around the world. We conducted comprehensive research and benchmarking to understand access and prioritize where J&J needs to focus efforts. The information and insights we leverage build a strategic framework that requires us to take meaningful, deliberate, and thoughtful actions. As part of this race to health equity, J&J has committed over $100 million over the next 5 years to invest and promote health equity solutions, focusing on 3 main pillars: people first culture, which is all about inclusive workforces; healthier communities, which improve health outcomes for people of color; and enduring alliances, which is J&J's powerful partnership network and using this to combat racism and social health determinants. My colleague Ramon will touch upon some of these programs today, and they're specific to the clinical trials teams that fall under this broader initiative. So thank you again. Really excited for this opportunity. And please don't hesitate to reach out to us if you're interested in learning more about these important initiatives or Johnson & Johnson Innovation overall. So with that, I'll hand it back to you, Alexandra.
Thanks so much. Great. So I'm now happy to introduce Kimberly Tableman, the CEO of Medicine X.
Hi, Alexandra. Thank you so much. And I am honored to be here today with a 22-year plus career in pharmaceuticals and technology. I'm very passionate about how we improve and increase access for all people to clinical research, and really excited to be able to facilitate this discussion today. So without further ado, I'm going to introduce our panelists, and then I will have each of them share their personal passion for this space as well. And then we will move into a set of questions. We're also happy to take questions from the participants. If you would just raise your hand, Alexandra will be able to help facilitate that as well. So our first panelist that I want to introduce is Ramona Burris, Associate Director, Diversity and Inclusion in Clinical Trials at the Janssen Pharmaceutical Companies of Johnson & Johnson. Sophia Goodison, Senior Director, Oncology, Safety Evaluation and Risk Management at GSK. And Eric Roberts, VP of Diversity Clinical Trial Solutions at a Real Chemistry company. And I will start by asking Ramona to share a bit about her personal journey and passion for diversity in clinical research.
Thank you, Kimberly, for the introduction, and thank you for having me on the conversation today. So I'm a clinical pharmacist by training. I've spent 15 plus years in infectious disease space, where in that direct patient care, I really understood the value of clinical trials and having patients participate in that space to get access to emerging new treatments that led to positive patient outcomes. And that added to when I became a patient myself, that journey being also applicable to me. So I'm a metastatic breast cancer patient who's currently in a clinical trial where I'm having positive outcomes. And so the barriers that it took for me to get through my own healthcare journey and into the clinical trial space are some of the tools and assets that I leverage now in the R&D space where I sit here at Janssen. So super excited for this conversation. And Kimberly, thank you again for having me.
Thank you so much, Ramona. And Sophia?
Yes, hello everyone. Sophia Goodison is my name. I currently work at GSK in the oncology space, global safety. And I've been in oncology for many, many years, or predominantly part of my career. Also worked in cardiovascular and other therapeutic areas. And so in all of the time that I've spent there, I've always said to myself, it's good where I'm working in the corporate setting and what it's doing for patients, and a number of them we've actually met. But how do I use that information not only within a corporate setting, but also in my community and also on an individual level, particularly also with gender matters, women, and our understanding and our utilization of the healthcare systems, or sometimes our hesitancy. Also people of color, and also in particular communities, and I'm sure I'll talk about it in a little bit. Some of my experience has been, just a one-on-one with people to help them understand clinical trials. Is this a good one for them? Is this not a good one for them? And this is not even in the corporate setting, but at a one-on-one level. And we'll talk a little bit about that a little in a short while. So thank you.
Thank you, Sophia. And Eric?
Morning. Hi, Kimberly. Thank you for having me, and happy to be a part of this esteemed panel. I am probably the newbie in the group. My background is multicultural marketing, which I did for several large brands, including McDonald's. Pharma is a new space for me, but I think a lot of the learnings that come from what I did in my previous life have informed what we're doing today. And a lot of the things that pharma is new to, a lot of the other non-industry companies have figured that out. So it's applying thinking that was over there, over here, all designed to improve health equity in the ecosystem. So I'm excited to be a part of this conversation, and I look forward to dynamic idea exchange.
All right, thank you. Thank you so much. Very excited to have each of you here with us today. So I am going to just start and open it up for each of you. We can start with Ramona in terms of what does trust and access actually mean to you in the context of clinical research?
Yeah, I think trust and access is a two-way street, right? From a sponsor perspective, where we sit in pharma, we have to gain and respect the trust of the community and the patients that we ultimately serve. And I'm so excited that Eric brought up health equity, because clinical trials plays a large part in the health equity conversation. And I think folks don't really understand, if we think about drug development and, again, tools that are leveraged to ensure those positive patient outcomes, it's important that we invite all who will potentially take the medication to this clinical trial space, so that we have a full awareness of efficacy or safety concerns. And so that means that we have to not only just go after one population, but go after diverse folks and diverse communities and engage them in a conversation to address, what are the hesitancy or concerns about clinical trials, because they're there, and rightfully so, because of some of the history that plays in this space. But again, taking that clinical trial aspect and just mirroring it to the whole healthcare landscape, the care continuum, and this health equity piece, I think is what's going to resonate with folks, because clinical trials, sometimes people just turn it off because it's too scientific. But I think we're in a good space right now in society where, with recent conversations around Operation Warp Speed, there is this interest. So let's maximize this moment to really get into the communities and down to the ground level to, again, answer questions that folks have, but really invite them to partner with us in this journey. That's trust.
Thanks, Ramona. Thank you. Eric, did you want to share your thoughts on trust and access, what that means?
Yeah, I'm Ramona and I are like bookends here, so I'm going to jump into what she said because I think she hit the nail on the head. But before we do that, I think everybody's got a different definition of what diversity is, and I think that's a great place to start. In my time, I've evolved my thinking around diversity because you typically think of it as one thing, but diversity covers so much. My dad is in a nursing home, 96 years old, with dementia. He's a diverse population representative. So when you think about it, he's covering multiple. He's elderly, geriatric. He is a dementia patient. He's African American. That's diversity. So I think that's key to any conversation. What is your definition? And I think it doesn't get locked. It's ever evolving and ever changing, because diversity is that thing that keeps evolving. But back to the health equity piece, and with clinical trials, I think that it requires a little bit more understanding to that trust that you talked about, Ramona, in terms of how we go back and forth and how we engage people. Because again, if I'm not familiar with a clinical trial and I don't know how it works, you've got to take time. You've got to talk to me. You've got to walk me through it. You've got to walk the patient through the process and perhaps have ongoing check-ins. Yes, you know what? Alexandra signed up for a trial on Friday. I'm going to call her on Monday.
Yes, build that relationship. Yes.
Good about this. Then I'll call her again on Wednesday. Any questions? Because I think it's not just about getting people into the trial, it's retaining them. Because I think another big issue we have, I think you all agree, is dropout. So I think it's tender loving care that is necessary in that trust as well.
Yeah, great points, Eric. And Sophia, what are your thoughts about trust?
Yes. So if Eric and Ramona are the bookends, then I'm happy to be the pages, because because I totally agree with what's been said. And I do believe trust and access is a two-way street. I can present everything there for what I would hope for you to trust what I'm saying is correct and to provide the access. But you as a patient or the one in need of it, you need to feel comfortable that you're and ready, because there's that whole hesitancy, and we talk a lot about that in the space of the COVID-19 vaccine. But in healthcare as a general in a general sense, that hesitancy is there. So that trust has to be built from both sides. And I totally agree, Eric. It takes time sometimes. It takes time all the time, and you can't give up. And the understanding, and that understanding is not going to be immediate, but I do believe it eventually does happen. I'm very touched with the example. I don't know if you've seen it in the press with Dr. Kizzy Corbett. I'm so thrilled, and I'll probably name her, call her name a few times. The brilliant scientist, immunologist, part of the research for one of the vaccines that's out there now for COVID-19, and how she had it was a public forum, and there was a young man who asked the questions, and he was hesitant about it, and his mom was there. These are educated African American and people, he and his mom, and eventually they did go and get that first vaccine, and then they went back again, and she actually met them. And that that said a lot to me, because that was trust, that was giving them access, but they had to be ready as well. So it was from both sides. And so it's a partnership, trust and access. And I'll stop right there for now.
Thank you so much. And I see a question coming in from Sarah. So what role does technology play in building trust with diverse patients? What are your thoughts about that? It's a great question.
Yeah, that is. Technology is important for access, right? Because if we talk about clinical trials solely, sometimes there's distance concerns or transportation concerns that may hinder or may be a barrier to enrolling diverse groups into clinical trials. And so being able to leverage technology, because we all pretty much have smartphones now, right? Where we can have access to, informed consent that's electronic, or to a PI directly if we have questions about, enrolling in a clinical trial. So I think technology is important there, but then also technology is important in identifying where the need is, because there's still this gap of data to really hone in to like where the disparities are when it comes to healthcare and health access. So it kind of works in both spaces. And I'm glad that Sophia brought up the vaccine trials, because at Janssen, our ensemble trial, we really leveraged technology to get to the folks who were most impacted by COVID-19, whether that's honing in on geographically where were the higher rates of incidence, but then also to kind of help us say, okay, who are those sites that we need to engage from a research standpoint to make sure that we're providing value with enrolling folks in clinical trials. So that's a great question. Technology is important.
Great. Thoughts on that, Eric or Sophia?
I think that technology is important, but I think we look at it in a non-traditional sense once again. So Ramona hit on key points. Let's go a little bit further, because technology is the friend. So if you're bringing people into an environment where they've never been before, they don't feel comfortable. I believe there's fear on both sides, both from the site staff and the patient. There are ways that technology can enhance that just by providing information using the smartphone, what you can expect, what you have questions about. So if we can open up that dialogue through technology, I think it empowers both the patient and the site. And I think those are the pieces that we've encountered that are missing. It's a lack of that two-way street communication. I need to know that you're there and that you care, because I'm going to make an investment. So when we can illustrate through technology that the investment is viable and what the end goal is, it informs, it educates, and it empowers. And I think those are the things that we really have to do with patients who have traditionally been underserved and ignored. It'll make a healthier ecosystem for all of us.
I totally agree. And when you say technology, if I wanted to define it, I could define it as social media. That's technology, and ways that you're going to get a patient's going to get the information. Exactly what you were saying, Eric. And the information is out there, and people are looking, they are reading, and hopefully understanding, but very importantly, asking the questions. So we have to use a technology, but that's from a patient perspective. But then we also have to understand from a pharmaceutical perspective, and I work at GSK, although my statements represent my own opinions, that we need to understand who is our consumer, who's our patient, because you're developing it, for our patients first. And so we need to have that understanding, and technology can help us with that, to map out, are we really meeting the goals that we intended to? Also to understand, what do our clinical trials look like? What's the data showing? I mean, who would be our feasibility testing? Who would be benefiting from this medicine? And so technology has a broad opportunities for use in what we're talking about today.
So true.
Great, thank you.
Hi everyone, popping in because we have a couple of audience questions coming in. We have a great one here in the chat. So Sabrina asks, the FDA, or she is stating that FDA is starting to pay more and more attention to diversity in clinical studies, rightfully so. She doesn't think that they've gone so far as establishing minimum quotas or regulations around inclusion. And the question to the group is, do you think that they should, versus just having corporations do it on their own?
I think diversity in clinical trials, it's not it's going to take a collaborative effort to move the needle. And so I welcome all stakeholders in this space to offer guidance. And so the FDA did publish their guidance, I believe, November 2020 of last year, where they, have set forth recommendations that potentially sponsors and pharma companies can leverage when designing protocols, when, like Sophia said, identifying those sites where we're going to stand up clinical trials. So I think that's just an example of the partnership that's going to be required to, again, have some action, because we've been talking about diversity in clinical trials for a while, and we haven't really seen the pull through. And so, my team at Janssen, we've leveraged a campaign called Research Includes Me, an empowering education program to kind of, again, and involve the community, involve patients, and involve healthcare providers in conversations of why it's important, but to then be able to point to the FDA and its guidance and recommendations to kind of solidify our internal work. It's a win-win.
Agreed. Ramona, we got to spend more time together. This is the thing that, again, the FDA guidelines, in my opinion, are soft. And I think that's purposely so, because then that pushes it to the point where the sponsor has to take the action. And again, you can't do it in a vacuum. So here we are, you've got guidelines. They say this is what you do. You want your drug approved, there should be a representation of the population. We get that. Now, what's the action that takes place, and where does the responsibility lie? And I think it starts at the top and it finds its way down. So within an organization, if I tell you as the head of this organization, this is important, then everybody falls in line. But it is, to Ramona's point, it's not one, it's not two, it is a collective. That means every stakeholder needs to step up and do what he or she can do to push this forward. Again, diverse populations are not a monolith. So we have to open up our minds, we have to open up our eyes and look at this in a way that says, okay, what are the best practices that we can learn from? It is that group effort. That's the answer. It's not.
I love that. And going back to your dad, how you said, he fits into many buckets. There are dimensions of diversity within diverse groups, right? So we really truly have to be cognizant of that. And that's why, again, as a sponsor, GSK and Janssen, we can't do it alone. It takes that FDA to kind of put this guidance out there and drive it and potentially enforce it, who knows? But it also takes, involving physicians who are in this space to be willing participants in this journey that we're all going on together. But
yeah, I totally agree with everything that's being said, and particular, again, the statement about what is diverse, and having been a part of a number of approvals for a number of medicines that are currently on the market now, when we're going through the analysis of the data and working with regulatory agencies, not just the FDA, but around with other regulatory agencies in the world, you need to do that analysis and understand that what's elderly, subtypes of elderly, male, female, all ethnic groups, because at the end of the day, you need to understand how this medicine, or how to apply the data that you have to this medicine. And so this has been something that companies, they have no choice. They have to do that analysis and present it when they're looking to have their medicine or therapeutic or vaccine approved. But exactly what you were saying also, Ramona, this is something that needs to start early now. It's, it's not like, oh, we have the data and this is what it looks like. It should be, oh, we're designing this program. Let's talk about it now so that we can also, and even have patient engagement in the early stages of it. Because they'll give input, yes, intentional, and they'll say, this design is applicable, it's not applicable, or this really doesn't make sense for the patient population who will be treated, or, the issues that we're dealing with, the quality of life issues, or any of the other matters, or, to understand even the risk profile. So early patient engagement is quite important, and any company would be prudent to do that early, rather than doing it later or having to address it in any post-marketing studies. But I'm getting very technical. I'll stop right there.
You shouldn't stop. I think you hit the nail on the head, Sophia, because again, if I'm a sponsor, I want to do this in a cost and time efficient manner.
Mhm.
If you do the work up front when you're in the design phase, you're going to get rid of all of those amendments that are costing you money, that are costing you time and setting you back. So that's probably the biggest idea or the biggest concept. Start early, figure it out. Get patients to tell you, because a lot of people get excluded because of the criteria set
Yes.
up in the design says, you know what, can't have diabetes, can't have high blood pressure, can't have. Well, you're excluding large swaths of the population.
Mhm.
How do we move forward with that?
That's why that patient insight and involvement and having a seat at the table is important. And again, going back to
Yes.
our ensemble trial with the vaccine, it really was at day one, let's get folks involved, because sometimes, you know, from a sponsor perspective and even from a clinician perspective, we wag our fingers at the patients and say, oh, it's the patient's fault. You know, they're the reason why, you know, they're not coming into trials. But I really think it's not. If we get the insights, if we again look at it from the entire healthcare cascade, where we know that folks are
Yes.
marginalized, right, in these
Yes.
spaces, and so empower people by giving them a seat at the table, hearing their voices, making
Exactly.
sure they're heard, and making them an advisor, just in the
Yes.
same kind of bucket that we put physicians and PIs in, right? But having them be a true partner with us in this space.
And that circles back to the original question about trust and access.
Mhm.
I will trust someone more so if I understand what they're doing and if I have some opportunity for input. I will trust you because I know what you're doing. I've been a part of it.
Mhm.
It circles back to that original question, trust and
And back to
access.
your comment about social media, right? To use those folks as you know, influencers or whatever the word is now, but to amplify, hey, I was a part of this, you know, this is a trusted, vetted process, and to just make it infectious, right? Because bad news spreads fast, right? Rumors spread
That's right.
fast, but
Hmm.
taking those stakeholders that we've identified and having them amplify their voice as well too.
That's right.
I think you guys wonderful feedback and comments. And one of the things we talked about as we were coming into this session was this idea of being action oriented, which is my favorite thing. And so I would love for you to talk to us a little bit about how can people in each and every one of us, you know, take some ownership and take some action. I heard a lot of interesting ideas already that have been talked about, even in terms of how do we think about building out more of a diverse community in terms of our investigators and PIs? And is there a way to help in that space? Because then we know that patients are going to feel more comfortable. So I think Daryl had mentioned in one of his questions that he sent through to us saying, hey, if the whole investigator team you know, is white, you know, how do I feel from a diversity perspective in terms of feeling like I can connect or that I feel safe or that I trust? So it would be really interesting to hear your thoughts on how to be a little bit more action oriented even in that space.
Yeah, so here at Janssen, we're being intentional, and it's not enough to just create the strategy, right? Because I think folks kind of just do that and think it's a one and done, but it's like, how do you operationalize it? How do you make sure it's executed across all of the various clinical studies and trials that our, you know, respective companies have? And so with that, it becomes, again, just the intention that we're not dating anymore, right? We're getting married, right? We're investing into these relationships and these partnerships, and not just from a financial standpoint, but a commitment to identify potential deficits. Like if we are looking for new PIs or maybe a community hospital who's maybe never conducted research, but there's an opportunity there to be willing to provide the resources that they may need, which may be different from what our traditional academic institute may need in terms of, you know, implementing our clinical trials, but being willing to invest for the marriage, right, for the long haul. And I think that ties into not only a patient perspective, a community perspective, but also in the research space, and then the broader landscape, again, acknowledging that there are key stakeholders who fall outside of this R&D space, this trial space, because, you know, we call them social determinants of health, but it is so true that there's this entire group of folks who are stakeholders. So the more that we identify them and seek to authentically partner with these groups, the better we execute.
I call it an ecosystem of influencers. Now, when we think of influencers, we think of Kardashians, and that's not what I'm talking about. I think that if you think about this in an honest way, let's talk about the Black community. The Black female is the original influencer. She influences her household. She influences her community. So let's start there, because trusted voices. And I think I read this thing about that Dr. King wrote, where he left the playbook. It was about a different time and a different space, but we can rely on churches, and everybody's wanting to have a faith-based relationship. They're trusted in the community. You've got organizations like the Links. They're trusted in the community. You've got these borrowed credibility pieces that allow people to go, okay, so if we can leverage their voices, it gives credibility, because again, we don't want to start all over, but we need to lean in and do a better job of bringing those voices forward, because it is that ecosystem and those influencers, regardless of where they are. And it doesn't mean that you have to be famous or you have to be of a certain stature. Your minister, the first lady of the church, the Links member, as I talked about before, or just a community organizer. We need to get those voices into this conversation as well, because I'm more apt to listen to that voice than one I don't know, or one that's foreign to me, or one that I don't trust. So we are still coming back to the main point about trust and access, but it's who's driving the car that gets us from point A to point B. And I'm better to lean into somebody who, and I don't think it says that Black people just listen to Black people. I'm not suggesting that, but it's more about the credibility and the belief and the trust that I know you're not going to steer me wrong. I know that if my minister tells me this, I trust my minister. If the person who lives up the street from me, who's gone through this, then I'm more apt to lean in and say, yeah, okay, now you have my attention.
And Sophia, I think our companies are realizing that this is not just an initiative, right? Like, this is a way, again, to operationalize it. And I'm sorry, but I just wanted to put that out there. Like, we're not just in it for the dating, we're in it for the long term. Like, how do we build our family, right?
Absolutely, absolutely. Even working with exactly what Eric was saying before, those trusted entities or influencers within the community, specifically looking, let's say, at the African American community. You know, one example again, another example I'm going to choose this time is with Dr. Ayla Stanford. And for those who don't know, the founder of the Black Doctors COVID-19 Consortium. I continue to follow her. I'm intrigued with what the work she has done. Hopefully she'll watch this and I'll get to meet her. I'm teasing. But, you know, it started out, this doctor in the community, what can I do about what's going on with, you know, with this COVID-19? So she took her money, worked with the church community, trusted community influencers, and started with the COVID-19 testing. Then from there, and worked within the low-income neighborhoods in Philadelphia, because they were not getting this testing early in all of this. They were not getting that access. And then from there, then there was the opportunity to provide the COVID-19 vaccination. Worked within trusted communities, again, the church, and people came. You know, also at a university, she set it up from scratch with her team that they put together, has been a model, not only here in Pennsylvania, but broad-based and so forth. And recently now I hear I'm also working now to set up something there within the community to expand it now in the future for vaccination, flu vaccination, pediatric care, and so forth. This now is an example of working within a trusted a community where people will trust you. Why? That would be a beautiful community to collaborate with and say, hey, do you know much about clinical trials? Do you know that they're set up not just for everyone else, but for you too? And if I were someone, I would sit and listen to her and say, oh, she didn't fail me during COVID-19 testing. She didn't fail me for vaccines, she and her people and her team. Let me talk to her about what's going on with clinical trials, because that's what I'm finding out. people think, oh, it's not for me. It's for everyone else, not for me. They're going to use me as an experiment. No, you're not. It's there for us all. We all have access to it. We all should benefit from it. But if you don't know or you don't trust who you're working with, it's not going to happen. So this is another example of, the trust and actually access as well, and that we have to keep driving it the best way that we can and not give up.
An example of taking an
Amen.
initiative and growing it, right? So what goes beyond COVID-19, because health disparities are not new. Definitely COVID put the spotlight on it, but how do we build this into a broader program? And I love Dr. Stanford, but twin sister docs in Philly too. Like, it's so many of these experts who are really boots on the ground, who are identifying, okay, we need to do better. And they're pulling stakeholders like us in, right? Like help us, partner with us, let's do this collectively.
Yeah, see, I think Dr. Stanford is
sorry to interrupt. Go ahead, Eric.
No, Dr. Stanford's story is huge for a couple of reasons. I first heard about her. I'm in Philadelphia on an NPR story, and then it picked up the traction. So then I think we can't leave the press and the media out of it, but we've also got to look at the media and the press that people trust. So NPR is great. But I could also find a story about Dr. Stanford in the Philadelphia Tribune, which is the Black newspaper. So I think that this responsibility, this shared responsibility, doesn't just sit where we believe it does. I think the Tribune has done a great job in pushing information forward, because some of us don't just rely on mainstream media for information. So we've got to think about, I think both ladies said earlier, the patient population and where they're getting information from, because that's key to this. So I love the Dr. Stanford story getting the credibility and the
amplification.
But again, think about the amplifiers and think about who that's really connecting with, because that is where the magic happens.
And the radio stations too, and the different churches, because she went to all the multiple different churches, and that amplifier concept, that's great, Eric.
I wanted to insert quickly an audience question that's somewhat related. You're talking a lot about, influencer marketing and pulling from these different sources. And the audience question is, are there basically kind of analogs or comparables to other industries that the pharma industry can learn from to kind of address this kind of topic around messaging and amplification?
I think, Eric, that's your wheelhouse with marketing, right? Taking so many of the lessons learned and tactics that were successful in that space. And again, applying it to healthcare overall, not even just in the pharma lens. Because sometimes I think about the NFL, how they intentionally went after engaging women into their outreach, right? And just how that just amplified, and it was a market that no one ever paid attention to. So I think that's the same thing that where Sophia and I sit, we look at, okay, who are those non-traditional groups? Who are these broader masses? Who are these emerging experts, that we can kind of, again, go forward together with?
You are so spot on in as much as that, again, McDonald's, where I cut my teeth and grew up, understood that the access to food, we're not talking about the type of food, we're talking about the access. You're going to serve it up in a way that's going to be meaningful, no pun intended, to all audiences. But to that, we're not a monolith. What appeals to me as a Black person may not appeal to somebody who's white, may not appeal to somebody who's Latino, may not appeal to somebody who's elderly. So we have to figure out a way to bring about the democratization. I'm going to pull on those things that are important to you. So if I know that generational health is important, then I'm not just going to talk to a teen or a tween. I'm going to talk to the parent. Kid can't go do this if the parent doesn't say, you can do this. So again, we've got to look at the holistic picture, not just this part of it, and say, if we're marketing, and it is all marketing, let's be comprehensive in the approach. Again, one size does not fit all. So what works over here won't work over there. Black people are not dark-skinned white people. So there are cultural differences that must be acknowledged. There are other differences that go into what makes me fearful, and we all know about Tuskegee, we know about all those things, but we need to start to not look back but look forward in terms of how we save ourselves. And I think that's the magic of what I see happening with diverse communities. They're not waiting for somebody to come and save them. People like Dr. Stanford and these ladies are saying, no, we've got to take these things into our own hands and heal
That's right.
ourselves, because that's when it's going to happen. No one can fix us. We've got to also bear responsibility for fixing ourselves.
Yeah,
Yes.
and I wonder too about, just as a question to put out there is, how do we build that trust before we need it? Because that's something that I think about a lot is when you're dating, or to Ramona's point, getting married to somebody, you are building that relationship long before you need to make an emotional, we call it emotional deposits and withdrawals in my family, right? So before you take a withdrawal, we say you need to make 10 deposits for one withdrawal. So if you think about that, even in this context of dating, marriage, relationship with community that we're trying to create, how do we make those 10 deposits before we're then asking for something or asking someone to trust us from an industry perspective?
Yeah, I think it means broadening the definition of who we identify as a partner, right? So I'm very happy to say that my company, we sponsor different STEM activities where we're going into the high schools and talking about career options for students, and not just, health professions, but the broader, marketing, the business, and then providing opportunities for internships and fellowships, and really starting, with this group who will potentially grow up and become part of this ecosystem that we're all now working in. But then also, who are those non-traditional other partnerships, right? There's so much focus right now on engaging colleges, from HBCUs, but then, who else are we not identifying? So just being, again, intentional and inviting all stakeholders to move and be part of this process with us, I think it's key. And like you said, to do it before we have an ask, right? To really go into these opportunities, get to learn each other, allow folks to vet us, right? Where we sit in pharma, but then not really developing like what is this strategic partnership going to look like until maybe next business year. But again, allowing folks to be comfortable to be in our space and understand that we are truly willing and wanting them to be a partner and not just something to drive a current initiative.
It's trust bank, and that's what it is. It's a trust bank, and you have to make, to your point, deposits in the trust bank. I think the other piece is to listen, because a lot of what I've seen is people want to show up and say, we're here to save you. Why not show up and say, what is the need? Ultimately, we know what we want to do, but we've never asked the community. We've never asked the stakeholders, both HCPs and patients, what's the need? What is the need? And that's how Kimberly and I got on that conversation about food deserts, because if you look at it, that is a perfect opportunity that needed to be met. We needed to understand that there are people who are food insecure. So where do you start? Well, you know what? It could be a victory garden. It could be bringing in nutritionists. These are deposits that could talk to people in an environment where they're willing to hear it. It would serve a lot of different purposes. But again, we have to not just say we're here to save you and we want something. What is the need? What can we do to meet you halfway? And those are where the deposits in that trust bank come up, because once I begin to see you show up and I think you are concerned, and then I begin to believe you are concerned, then we're building the trust. Because when you want to make a withdrawal, you won't be foreign to me. But I think a lot of what I'm seeing now is that people just showing up saying, here's a gift card. Well, you know what? Now you're turning it into a transactional relationship, and that does not do anything other than offend. And if you want to give me money, I'll take the money, but you're not going to get the benefit of what you're really going after. So back to listen, let's understand what the need is, and then we can move it forward.
Understanding is key. I was just going to say that, because it's one thing to have voices tell us, but sometimes we don't understand and process. So that's another key component. Yes, so glad you mentioned that.
I really love the concept of the trust deposit and the listening, and all at the table trying to understand each other, because there's something that can be given from both sides. For example, I know at our company, GSK, also looking at who are our suppliers. Who do we work with? Not when we just have to, or we have this to give to you, but how can we truly say that we want to work with you and we trust the work that you're doing? So who are our suppliers? And do we have a commitment to now look at more of the diverse suppliers and utilize that talent even within what we do at a company? I know that is one of the initiatives there at GSK. I can speak to that, and that's externally facing, so it's out there as well. But also exactly what you said, Ramona, STEM. So, you know, trusting and knowing that we're in it for them early. I mean, from middle school years, high school, college. And another important point too, a lot of times we think through college, but what about apprentice programs? So everyone won't go to college, but another way for you to have that opportunity to learn and be a part of what we're doing. That's also another opportunity that's out there and should be considered apprenticeship, not just those who have the wonderful opportunity to go on to college and so forth, but there are others who can provide, you know, a lot of input and value to a company. So again, you have to look at different areas of where others can support what a company's doing. Not just, oh, we have something for you to, like what Eric said, we have a check for you, but how can you as an external person to the company help us to meet the needs to provide the best medicines for our patients and others out there.
I think that's fantastic. Thank you so much for that. And I wanted to ask, how do you think building more diversity just into the healthcare ecosystem and into clinical research and creating more of that partnership and collaboration, how will that change the world?
Well, different voices at the table always bring out a different income. I remember going to conferences with the previous company I worked for, and it was always the patient perspective, but the patients were always white. And I began to say, well, could you not find a brown or a black or a gay patient? We don't know where to look for them. I think that's where the diverse voices who are making decisions at the table can open up doors, can open up eyes, and open up minds. If we continue to use what has traditionally been done because it's comfortable or it's what we know, then we will not grow. We will not become more open to things that are different. So I think the change starts with bringing new and innovative voices to the table. Not to say you should get rid of people, but you need to expand it. We need to expand so that we are at least hearing what we don't know. I've had people tell me, oh, well, 60% of research says that Black men, blah, 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 blah. And I have to say, stop, look up at your computer. I'm a Black man. So while that's true, I'm going to give you a perspective that may go against what you're saying. I'm not saying what you put out is wrong, but you're in this silo. And inside the silo, you're not hearing what else exists to get us where we need to be. So it is open. That's where the opportunity is to expand, because there are things that none of us know everything. But boy, if you can open up my mind and let me know that this is something that is unique and different. Because I said, diversity is never going to be locked. It's going to continually evolve. It's going to continually expand. It's going to have subsets and subgroups, but we can only get better when we open up our minds and we open up ourselves to things that are not comfortable. And I think that's where the issue is. It's not going to be comfortable. These women are in the forefront for two big companies. I work for a global health company as well, not a pharmaceutical company. But again, one of the things that this has taught me, and I continually learn, is that you have to be open, you have to be willing, and it's going to be very, very uncomfortable at times. But the pain is worth it when we can get to the result that says, okay, this is what diversity and health equity look like.
Yeah, the elephant in the room, I think, right now is the health disparities in the Black and Brown communities, right? And so, if the American Medical Association can explicitly say that racism is what do they say, is a public health issue or a threat, that's something that we should all listen to. And again, globally, it's going to be a different priority, but here in the U.S., onus on us to prioritize, those two groups when it comes to the initial efforts to drive, diversity and inclusion in this healthcare space and this clinical trial space. And that also goes into, like what Sophia said, recognizing the vendors and suppliers that sometimes we keep them out of the equation, but it matters who we stand up as a CRO in these clinical trial sites and who they have access to. It matters which marketing team that we're leveraging to create patient assets, to make sure that they're culturally intelligent and that no one's turned off and they're inclusive to all. So I agree with you, Eric. The more that we get comfortable with being uncomfortable, and again, engaging all stakeholders and knowing that we need to do things a little bit differently and be intentional about that and operationalizing it, right? I think that's there when we see the change.
Yeah. And Sophia, I think that what's coming to mind for me is Sophia and I did some work together at GSK around advocacy and allyship. And that was as it related to females in leadership, but I feel like that's applicable here as well. And that everybody needs to know that they need to have a voice, a stake in the game. And so, our brothers and sisters that are, of all different ethnic backgrounds need to be raising their voices together. I think, Eric, you kind of alluded to that as well. But Sophia, I'd love to hear your thoughts on that as well, just in terms of, again, getting people involved, engaged, and activated as a community.
Sure. And the model that Kimberly was talking about was through the Women Leadership Initiative. And sitting in that capacity, working towards gender equality for women at GSK. And then as a part of that, you have to look at the different intersections of that, the intersectionality of that, because yeah, you're a woman, but Black woman, you could have different sexual preferences there. You could have disability. There's different intersections there. But then also, so when you work in that employee research group, ERG, you also want to talk to your allies. And there was recently, we were a part of a presentation in regards to male allyship. We can't do this on our own. And if you think you can, then I'm sorry, you're wrong. We need everyone. We need all to work together, moving towards that united cause. And it'll take time. We can't give up. We just have to keep going, keep locking arms, step in step. Everyone may not be with us. And, if that's your expectation, I mean, that's the reality. I mean, that's where it is. Hopefully they'll change their mind, but you still have to keep moving forward, lock in step with your allies, and we work towards the greater good of all, because it'll be beneficial to us all at the end of the day. So I'll just stop there.
And be willing to fail, right? Because there are going to be some things that we do as a tactic that may not be successful, but what are the lessons learned and how can we do better as we move forward?
That's right.
And I think related to that, Ramona, I wanted to ask the panel your thoughts on how do we measure progress? How do we kind of set the bar and say, we've had that intended impact? And, honestly, I don't know the answer. I know Eric's really challenged me to think through kind of the victory garden space. I don't know if it's setting some metrics even around that, like how are we helping and with that, if you say we're going to set a target to help with this many victory gardens in this many food deserts, that is building trust, that is building relationship in that community. And I talked to a really brilliant man, Dr. Terrace King, who speaks about, people pay attention, so if a GSK or a Janssen company or whomever is coming in and doing those types of things, a victory garden or nutritional education for folks with diabetes, we know African-American folks are impacted disproportionately with diabetes, but you see someone coming in and helping with nutrition, wellness, people do take note. So I don't know if those are the right measures, or are there other measures that we should be looking at as we think about having a true impact?
Yeah, I think from a pharma perspective, there are multiple ways to look at it. We can look at it from a health disparity lens. We can look at it from a population lens. But what I'm truly proud of is in the midst of COVID, we've seen so much collaborative effort between the pharma companies where we're usually a little bit more competitive. So whether that's participating on the multiple work streams that are out, the Transcelerates, the MRCT, and one that I'm proud to say that Janssen created in partnership with SysGrip, where we're bringing all the pharma folks together. And really, as we do our own internal like deep dives as to how have we fared thus far when it comes to prioritizing diversity and trying to establish like what are those benchmarks? Do we want to quickly jump from this to match the healthcare disparity that we see in this particular disease state, or do we want to look at what our peers are doing and kind of just come to a consensus, because we know it's going to take time. It won't be like an immediate, rapid response. Oh, we're so successful. It's going to take deployment of multiple stakeholders, different tactics to get to this endpoint. So how do we again benchmark it? But I think it requires that internal evaluation from a sponsor perspective, but also engaging our peers to say, hey, let's have these honest conversations. How can we do this and move the needle? Because we have so many clinical trials and products that are in the same space, and I'm so just excited that we're willing to share that information and be partners moving forward to get some traction.
I also don't think, I love the pilot approach. So I'm going to take a moment and say that you can't do all things. So pick an environment, pick a geography where we can pilot it, see how it works, and manage expectations around time. I've had more people come to me and say, I want a faith-based relationship and I'm willing to commit 6 months. And the response is no. Because you can't build that relationship in 6 months. Again, what you're now treating me like is a prostitute. Here's money. I'm going to leave and I'll come back if I want to see you again. So I think it's also about managing expectations to the point that was made earlier. It's not going to happen overnight. It's going to require investment. Investment does not just mean money. I think if you can walk away with one headline, it's not just about the money. Yes, money is important, but your commitment needs to be demonstrated in other ways, because there is no one fit. But don't insult the audience you're trying to engage. That's where this thing gets all squishy and sticky, because it's like, oh, well, I gave them money. No. What is the true level of investment? Pick a market, work within that market, make a commitment, and the commitment should not be 6 months. It really shouldn't be 12 months. It should be the commitment you make moving forward, because once we do that, it becomes the standard operation practice. We are invested in this for the right reasons, and this is what it looks like.
Eric, I told you I want to marry you. Are you not listening to me? I don't.
Oh, I love it. Great panel. And Sophia, I want to give you an opportunity to comment as well in terms of how do you think about measuring success or impact? What are some ways that we can think about that?
I agree that it takes time. It takes time to set up the measures and to know that they're working, and it's not going to be exactly like what Eric was saying, that short period of time, 6 months and so forth. It's an investment, and then you'll have in the long term a return on investment. I do think it's also data driven. So you should put something down that you can measure and look at, and within period of time. So not even necessarily 6 months, after a year. Did we meet the goal that we set we were going to do at this period of time? You don't stop there, but you kind of look at it and assess. And exactly what you were saying earlier, Ramona, there could be ways, things that could be done better. There could be some failures. Oh, let's redo this, let's rethink this. But again, the investment of time, resources, the knowledge that you bring there to share there with your stakeholders to continuously improve it and show that you really care, not just with your pocketbook or that check, which is useful, trust me. I mean, we're not going to say no to that because that's going to help build what you need, but it's more than that. It's that investment of time to really meet that goal together, collectively, and at the end of the day, that again will build that trust that we started to talk about from the beginning.
Yeah, money's just a band-aid.
Yeah.
So we need to do better.
And it's
That's
not
the quote of the day. Money is just the Band-Aid.
Yeah, and it's not the relationship, right?
That's right.
So
It has its role though, but it's not, the
all of
defining role. Yeah.
Yeah. And we had a Daryl, I believe, who was asking, let's see, about whether we think, this is very specific to clinical research, but whether we think that trials without placebo arms are more effective for the African-American community. In other words, are people fearful about participating in clinical research because, well, if I have diabetes and, I'm getting the placebo and not the actual therapy, maybe that's turning me off. So Daryl was just wondering if we had any thoughts about that.
That's a good question, because that falls into like the IRB and all these different structures that we have in place now with clinical trial design to prevent those type of situations from occurring. So you rarely see placebo in a setting where it's going to do harm to a patient. So like oncology trials, you take the gold standard and you compare it to this new emerging treatment. So placebos, it depends on, what kind of endpoint we're measuring or outcomes that we're measuring, but please know that the intent of clinical trials is not to do harm. And so it means if we're going to do a comparative trial, we're going to take, again, a drug treatment that's the gold standard and compare it to this new emerging compound that's out there.
And for the person who asked the question, please also note, and exactly what Ramon is saying, you can't just have a trial out there and not have proper oversight to know that it is properly designed. So trust that has been vetted very well. And then here comes the opportunity for knowledge, for understanding, because I've worked with people outside of my job, more in a community setting, and they were asking in their particular stage of where they were with their disease, maybe this dose finding study, perhaps that wasn't the best one for them. It was better for one that was maybe a phase 3 trial. So this is where you have an understanding, someone you can speak with, and then take it back and discuss with an understanding with your physician and your other healthcare providers, that you're walking in there understanding what is the best clinical trial for you. But again, they're designed for you as just as much as for everyone else. It's just for you to understand or have that understanding if that's the best one for you and your disease situation right there.
Thank you, Sophia. Great points. Eric, anything to add?
I think the ladies have said it all. I think the only other piece I would add is that we also need to put more emphasis on HCPs and healthcare providers being less ambiguous in language, especially with patients that are and caregivers who are not familiar. So
Yes.
again, and I think that we purposely get ambiguous and we talk and you use acronyms and that puts up a wall. So I think that we've also got to graduate to a point where we can say, you're going to go to a clinic. And we say site, it could be as simple as that, to say, you know what, and you're going to see a doctor, not an investigator. So I think that sometimes we're so immersed in this world that we live in that we don't remember that the patient population and the patient caregivers, this is foreign to them. So again, that TLC that I talked about earlier is key, especially when you don't know enough about clinical trials and you don't know. Again, the placebo question was spot on, but I think Sophia answered it just the way it should have been. There are guidelines and there are guardrails they're going to protect. But if you don't have a doctor or a healthcare provider who you can talk to, that adds the different level. So we need to just remember that we're talking to people and patients who may not have our level of understanding, who may not be where we are. So the less ambiguous, the better.
And Eric, we had a great related question come in through the chat. So this is asking, what do pharma companies do when some of the most trustworthy people we turn to, doctors, are not advocating for essential clinical solutions?
That's an issue. That's an issue. And I don't, again, we talk about how we educate HCPs and how we push them to do things that are uncomfortable. I think this is one of those areas where we have to do more of that, and also empower the patient, because there are so many things that the patient or the caregiver need to go in and feel comfortable asking. What will this do? What are the side effects? How will I get improved? But again, there's a fear to ask that, because either it's going to be an ambiguous question or the doctor is not going to be comfortable answering it. But I think this is the empowerment I was talking about before. We have to empower the patient population or the caregiver to say, you have a right to know. If we're going to ask you to do this, then you should go ask that person who is your physician, what are the outcomes? What will happen? What should I expect? It is that two-way street again.
Yeah, I think there's importance of that voice of the HCP who may not be part of, wanting to do the work, but it's important that we understand, because that person has a place in the landscape. Again, if we think about the entire healthcare system in general. And so that's where I kind of take my own personal experience where, clinical trials were never provided to me as a treatment option. When I found out that I had metastatic disease, I actually went myself to clinicaltrials.gov and found a trial that I felt met the criteria for and enrolled, and then went back to the oncologist and told them. But I think, again, there are so many barriers. So we don't want to confer blame at the patients. We don't want to confirm 100% blame at the HCPs, but it's knowing what some of these nuances are to be able to proactively or properly address them. So whether that is empowering patients to have, be that advocate of self and be, willing to ask the questions and probe and prod, or if it's the HCP saying, hey, okay, if you're not culturally competent to have this conversation, maybe we need to gauge someone else on your research team from a sponsor perspective. So I think there's value in identifying, again, what is really truly happening in these conversations in order for us to stand up the resources we need to make sure that access is provided to all.
And it can't just be the patient. If I can say one more thing, it's about the caregivers as well, because a lot of times the patient can't have the voice. My dad is a good example of that, but sometimes the patient is not equipped to do it. So we have to broaden that to make sure that the caregiver or the individuals who are responsible for that care can have a voice as well.
That is so true.
No, I was going to say I totally agree with that. Everyone's not going to be like my my elderly mom, who is a nurse and will go and search through Google and ask all the questions about her care. And then sometimes stump the physician and say, I got to get back in touch with you and I'll let you know why are we putting you on this and not on something else. Everyone's not going to be that way. And likewise from the healthcare provider, if they don't know, it's okay to say I don't know, but they do have to go back then to work with the sponsor and get a proper answer or a proper response. And patients' expectations should be clear too, that sometimes the answer is, we don't know the answer to that. That's why we're doing the clinical trial. You will help us to understand that. And you do have a right to get the results of this study when it's done. That's part of the informed consent. So it's also important to say, in some cases, we don't know. That's just the truth, and it's honest, and it sets up the right expectation. And it also shows the patient, that's why we're asking for your help. And, someone may ask the question, how is it different, in the African-American population, or in the female population, or in the any other type of population? The question is, we need your help with this. And that's an honest answer.
That's a good way to drop the mic. Okay.
And so I did want to say we're coming to the close of our time. So we did allow for about 15 minutes after 1 p.m. Eastern for questions. I'm not seeing any additional questions at this moment in the chat. However, I do want to invite the participants to get your last minute questions in if you have any. And if there are not any additional questions, we will go ahead and wrap up. And I just want to say thank you so much to my esteemed colleagues, and I really appreciate you being on the panel. I know every time I speak to each of you, I learn something new. So thank you so much for your time today.
Thank you.
Thank you
for having us.
And thank you, Kimberly. Honestly, this was such a fascinating conversation. I was riveted the entire time, as I'm sure everyone who attended was. So yes, I'm just so excited to see this event series kick off, especially with this event. So I guess I can wrap it up. And again, thank you to all of the panelists and thank you to everyone who attended. We really appreciate you spending the last hour and change with us. So please be on the lookout for a post-event follow-up from New Lab, where we'll include a recorded video of today's event, any materials that you might need, and a survey that helps us with future programming. And from the New Lab side, if you're interested in joining New Lab, the two main ways you can get involved are through our studio programs, whether you're a corporation or civic leader looking to launch an innovation studio, or an entrepreneur interested in becoming a New Lab member. We accept membership applications on a rolling basis, so just head to our website. But thank you again for joining, to Kimberly and to all the panelists. Such a great discussion.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you so much. Thank you.
Bye.
Have a good rest of your day.
Too.
Bye.